want to welcome you to the Carnegie Museum First Friday conversation with one of our family farm families. For the last 2 years, we've been highlighting different century and heritage farms. And tonight, we are welcoming the Parker family.
Thank you.
As we thank you for coming and thank all of you, such an incredible crowd for coming today to hear their story. And because the family farms in Jefferson County played a big role in the history of this county. So let's meet another one. So we'll start today with a simple question. Where is your farm located? And tell us when it was first established.
You tell them where, I'll tell them when.
It's in that way. No. Section 4 of Des Moines Township, which is in very northwest part of the county. When it started in 1845 with 160 acres. February 21 of 1894, James Dunn sold 40 plus 35 acres to Riley Parker, who was my grandfather.
That's where it all started. And from that original 160, there was a lot of parceling of land out. We don't know the answer to that, but that is what happened. So the notes show that it would be like Gene said, 40 plus 35. So, and then more came later because in February of 1906, Riley purchased another
45 and a half acres from Augustina and Joseph Wagner, bringing a total of 119.
Mm-hmm.
Riley continued to add parcels to the current 254 acres of land. Prior to that, people kind of sold pieces and bought pieces and sold pieces, and Riley added to it to get up to 254 acres. Riley passed away June 6, 1916, leaving the Parker farm and assets to his wife, Catherine Kate Celeste Peebler Parker, and their 6 children.
And then in 1918, the family decided, Kate and the 6 children, to sell the farm to 2 of the sons, 2 of the brothers, Claude and Clifford. So the 254 acres was sold and split right down the middle. In fact, they did a bit of a runway to get to back pastures and so forth there. So they each came up with 127 acres, but maintained it within the Parker family. So then, of course, we have the Great Depression hitting about 29, which started to change things. And in 32, Brother Claude decided to sell his portion to Brother Clifford. So Clifford then came into full possession of all 254 acres. Now, in January of 71, Clifford passed, and his widow, who was Mabel Jane Stull, there were 4 Stull girls, Parker, inherited the farm, which she continued to live on until she became no longer able. And then in March of 89,
we bought it.
But we weren't going to. And that was a big thing then. I received a call at my work, which most everyone here knows was at the health center, hospital then. And it was Gene saying, would you sign with me for this farm? Huh? That's all it took right there. Because the decision had been made otherwise for whatever reason, but it changed. And we're glad it did. We're very, very glad it did, because actually next year it will be 130 years, I think, from the original. So we're pretty excited about that as well. Anyway, so Riley Parker, who we learned his name was James Riley, and is the son of, I believe it is Marshall and Nancy Dunn. Yes, Parker. Marshall came from Virginia. Nancy was from Tennessee. And they ended having 5 children. Now, I've been Johnine and had to wear it my whole life. I think there was a plan for that early on. But their first child was a daughter, and her name was Parthena.
Never heard of
She
it.
beat me, pretty sure. Anyway, and then James Riley, which very funny. Jean's dad, Keith, always told the story that the kids would say, "What's your middle name, Dad?" And he'd always tell them, "My name's Riley Railroad Parker." But it was James Riley, we discovered. Charles Ray, Anna M., and George Washington Parker were the children. So just very interesting. He then married, as Jean said, Catherine Celeste Peebler, and anybody from the Batavia area knows that the Peebler family is a long-running family name out there. And her dad was Ellis Peebler, and he also is at Fell Cemetery, which is a piece out of the farm where we live. So they had, Riley and Kate had 6 children. And the first child was,
Theda Fern Hill, who's Dr. Hill's grandmother.
yeah. And
Grace Wilma Goebel and Clifford Milton Parker and Claude C. Parker, Frances Nora Height, and if you recall, the Height Medical Clinics was a donation from her, part of her estate.
Mhm.
And the baby, Keith Laverne, originally birth certificate says Laverne, but Jean found a document where it was corrected to Laverne.
It said Lauren.
Lavern.
Lauren. So the birth certificate was not correct. And there's an addition to it that said the name was corrected to Keith Laverne, which is what we always knew. Anyway, he went on to marry Frida Hazel Sheets, who lived 1 road south of his road and a little east. And they,
So back in those days, my mother went to high school at Batavia. And of course, there was not a dormitory, but you stayed with a person in their house.
bored to be able to go because you couldn't travel back and forth in those days to go to high school.
So the lady that had the house asked, "Will there be any gentlemen callers?" And my grandma, my mother's no. But the next night, my dad showed up. So
We always thought that was a good story. I waited for years for him to show up, but he did finally show up, which was pretty good. So they had 1 child. Now, you know, in those days, every 20 years there was a generation. And they were 38 and 41 when they had their only child, Jean. So we, in essence, skipped a generation when we talk about a grandfather and so forth. You have some very older dates, and Therese was talking about that in her own family here with us earlier. So they felt very blessed, and I think they were right. I've been very blessed too ever since. They gave him to me, or something like that. Then life on the family farm starts with handed down stories. There was a house fire, so lots of things were lost. Lots and lots and lots of things were lost. But they all started in a very small, and amazingly, Sandy Gillespie was saying how small some of the houses were, but a small house, and to have 6 children in it, it was a little 2-story house. And actually they had made arrangements and were building a new, larger 2-story house, which is still there on the farm. When Riley, Jean's grandfather, passed, they did go ahead and finish that house and move the little house, which was way back in the fields, up to the road. So there was easier access, and that little house was there for quite a while. Unusually, and we do not have the story behind it, but when Clifford and Mabel Parker purchased the farm, they moved into the big house, but they took the second story off of it. And maybe there are people here who would know why they might do that, but they did. So the second story was missing from that. A feature of that part of the farm was a very large barn that was fully outfitted with Loudon equipment, the overheads, the lifts, all of the goodies that were available at the time. So that was pretty good. And then another barn that had been the livery stable at Batavia, the old livery stable, Jean's dad took apart board by board, marked every one of them, hauled it to the farm, and then assembled it back in the appropriate order. It looks like a barn. Now that might not happen for us. You never know. But anyway, it just amazing. Everybody worked very hard. Chores were done by hand. They had cattle. The cattle provided meat for the family, but they were also a cash crop. They had milk cows. They needed to be as self-sufficient as possible, and they milked those twice a day. And the lucky kid that got to walk them back that lane to the back pasture was probably you probably could find lots of ways to waste time while you were taking the cattle back to the pasture. Cream separators. We still have one floating around the farms. Jean thinks it's in 2 different buildings, and it'll probably go into our estate for our son Judson, who's here right now, and he can go, why do they have this? Because you might want to tell a story with it someday. You never know. Anyway, so the milk cows gave calves, and the family got the milk, they got the cream, they were able to make butter and make cheese. The kids got in on the act with the milking. Everybody worked, and occasionally they would get a good smack with a tail or maybe a little bit of a kick, although Jean said they put something on called kickers or something, and was telling me how those, Martha's over here putting them on.
Horseshoe devices that fit on a hog. Exactly, yeah. He knows
Yep.
too, yeah, that's right.
I grew up on a farm.
There you go. You were right out in the middle of it. It sounds like if you know what kickers are. Where I grew up in Libertyville, kickers were something different. Those were the kids you watched out for. You didn't mess with the kickers, right? So anyway, then it became a cash crop too for them, with selling the butter, selling the cheese, or selling meat, milk and cream. And so that was a good thing, and they had hogs. Now, Jean's dad always called hogs the mortgage lifters, that they would be a profitable thing to have. And so the meat was butchered, the big heavy iron kettle was dragged out and put over a fire, and the lard was rendered, and the kids would kind of stand around, we understand, for the cracklings, the crispy parts that would float to the surface with that. So they would have that, and parts of the meat, like the sausage and the pork chops, were cooked, and lard was put in a crock, and the meat was layered with lard all over it to seal it off, and that crock was kept in the cellar. And they'd scrape the lard off and get the meat out. I know, but there you go. I see those faces out there. It's a different world we live in, isn't it now? We have expiration dates on each other even when you look around. So cash crop for them, but they were also
Take your hat
here.
off.
There you go. And a grandson, Sterling, has made it. They've been out of town working. Anyway, so let me see. The hogs were in open pastures. Now, those of you who've been around that, what do hogs do in open? They root and tear everything up, don't they? So you had to ring the hogs, and that meant they put the rings in the noses so they wouldn't root the ground up. And Keith, Jean's dad, always told the story of helping his father-in-law, Ellis Peebler, on the farm ring hogs. and that a big sow got away and managed to run between Ellis's legs, and Ellis ended riding the hog backwards out into the pasture where he fell off, and Keith said, I just laughed myself sick. And Ellis came up saying, Parker, it ain't right for a man to laugh when another guy's getting killed. So the stories go on. They had horses, and the horses were essential for transportation, and they were essential for work too. You had to have them. And they became parts of the family, a lot of them. They were pretty beloved, those animals. Then there were chickens. When I think of the Parker family, I think of chickens. Everybody had chickens. And I'm not kidding about that. Everybody did. And when I married into it, guess what? I got chickens. And it was okay. It was fine. So the chickens were so important, you know. We had the darling little baby chicks that grew up into ones. And I will tell you that one day when this one was sent to gather eggs, he didn't come back. And I went out and looked in the window of the chicken house, and he said, I hate you, chickens. So I'm sure everybody had their times. I know no one wanted to get pecked trying to get an egg out of a nest, you know. But the chickens provided meat, and they provided eggs. And I brought tonight, that we didn't have, an egg basket. These baskets were made really super sturdy. They gathered a lot of eggs, and you can pass them around if you want, or look at it, whatever you'd like. But the eggs were important. They were important for nourishment, but they were important to sell too. So that was pretty good. The eggs were kept in a crock bowl in the kitchen, out. You know, what was refrigeration then? But nobody got sick from it. It was okay. It worked for them. And you had a lot of eggs, boy, when you filled that up. And some of the chickens would be raised to be fat, heavy hens. And the Grandma Kate, when the older girls married and moved away, their Christmas was a fat hen that she would butcher and pluck. Now get this, with the eggs on the counter, you won't mind after you hear this, or the pork in the crock. That chicken was put in a box, all ready to go, and was taken to the train and sent to Kansas and Oklahoma. A letter was written before on the day that chicken would be delivered to the train, and when that chicken would arrive, and they would be there to get it and be thrilled that they had one of Grandma's chickens for their Christmas dinner. Was such a wonderful gift, and it was from home. You know those homemade gifts, how good they are. Chicken on a train. But can you even imagine that? But it was wonderful, and at the time it was a wonderful thing to be able to do.
And no dry ice.
Oh no, not even wet ice. In those days, I don't think much. And for the family reunions, everybody brought a fried chicken. That was just how it was, and family reunions were a big deal. And so that meant somebody got up pretty early and dressed the chicken, processed it, got it ready to go, fried it, and brought it, not on any kind of ice, to the family reunion. And I hear you got to know who made the best fried chicken, and you wanted to get to their container first to get it. But I had never done mass chicken processing until I married this man. And I want to tell you, I have passed that 101 class on chicken processing with the family, and it is quite a deal. And I will say there's nothing quite like homegrown chicken. But the process is not anything that I care to repeat. I'm fine buying my chicken at this point in my life. How about you?
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, and the breakfast standard was eggs and some type of bacon or side pork, fatty meat every day. But they worked hard, and they lived a long time. They lived to ripe ages, even with that type of intake that people, as we have kind of sashayed through the egg and the cholesterol things and new standards out this morning. And in the lean times, there were always eggs. And I remember my mother-in-law making scalloped eggs. I'd never heard of it, where you hard boil eggs and layer them with crackers like you would. It's quite tasty, but it filled bellies during the hard times. So they made use of absolutely everything. And World War One brought good prices for the farmers because Europe was just ravaged. They didn't have crops, and they didn't have the food supplies that we had. So those were good times. However, then came the Depression and debt and hard times for many farmers. But those who could be able to stick with their families were pretty darn glad, because you had the means to feed your kids, to feed your families, and make it work. So that's good. Anyway, the crops that they raised.
They raised corn, of course, they fed to the animals, and it wasn't a situation that they raised a crop of corn or beans to sell it as cash, but they marketed the corn and their other crops through livestock and then sold the livestock. Oats were really a prominent thing because they fed it to horses. And of course, if you were farming with horses real early, you needed that. Wheat was a cash crop, sold it to the elevator. Hay was necessary for livestock, obviously, because they ran out of grazing land when it got deep snow and cold weather. Potatoes were added. It's a staple about every meal and lasted through the winter. Power was supplied by work animals and humans, and a walking plow, which kept you in shape, I guess. So if you ate all that stuff we shouldn't be eating, you burned it all off. Forked hay, you chopped wood, and built fence, all by hand, which is just the way life was then. Everything was done in a natural order related to the seasons, hot weather, fruit jar of water. In other words, when you maybe went to the field to do some work, you put water in a fruit jar and you wrapped it around with a wet paper to try to insulate it. And then when you got to the field, you put it in the shade so that it wouldn't get hot.
No thermoses in those days,
yeah,
huh?
Before Yetis.
Yeah. And then they did have a small summer kitchen, which was a huge boon in the hot months for cooking the meals and for heating the water, because you pumped your water and you heated it for whatever you needed hot water for and went on from there. And we wouldn't want to leave out the outhouse. Now, there are lots of not only stories, but many tributes also to the outhouse that we won't repeat tonight. You may have heard some of them. Now, they had an ice house, and they would go in the winter months with an ice saw and saw blocks of ice. And
they stored the ice, or the blocks of ice, in a smaller building, some as insulated as well as they could. But then there was sawdust that they put around the ice cubes or ice blocks to keep them from melting as much as they could. That was the insulation they had. So,
how long did it last?
probably till July, just after the time you needed it for homemade ice cream.
For the 4th.
Yeah.
And then electricity. In I think 35, only like 90% of farms didn't have electricity. It was just too expensive for farms to have electricity. And fortunately, the Rural Electrification Act happened that year. And in 1936, federal funds were enacted to create rural electric cooperatives. Anybody hear of that before? And do we still have some that exist today? We do, without a doubt. And so electricity started arriving at farms. The Parkers didn't get it till the 40s. We don't know for sure. How about some of you out there? What year did you get electricity? How about you, Stan? Yeah.
34, 36.
Okay, someplace on that. So you see, it was all tied together there, and it was a good thing to have. It changed everything. And then at home, everybody worked, and everybody had to work. And the kids grew up knowing that you worked. You worked for whatever. They helped with whatever assignments, whether it was for mom or for dad, they worked at it. The stoves in the kitchens had the wood boxes to be filled with wood or cobs or whatever was being burned. The ashes needed to be taken out. Can you guess what they did with the ashes? Some of you know what they did with the ashes. Huh? They went to the chicken house. And the chickens flopped their feathers in it, and it was a natural insecticide for them, that it kept the mites and lice and so forth away. And I guess if we rolled in ashes, it might keep them away from all of us as well, if we chose to do that. So the gardens were huge, but the strawberry beds were more huge, I think, because the Parker family consistently, right down to this one, and the little ones too, like strawberries. So
My mom always took care of the garden. And when she went to harvest the strawberries, this hand had a pail for the strawberries, and this hand had a hoe. And you're thinking, what's the heck's the hoe for? If a snake showed up, it's not going to be there anymore. It's scared to death. So
did not want any snakes.
no snakes.
No snakes at all. Weeding was not a favorite thing, but everybody had to do it. And the farm had a whetstone, a rotary whetstone that was used to sharpen the hose, to sharpen other farming things, and to sharpen utensils for the kitchen, so that everybody could do it more easily, get the weeds out, I guess, on top of some other things. And foods were preserved. Everything was preserved. Canning was done. We don't know where smoking might have been done for some of the meats and things. But the cellar was used, and they had a big tub of sand to put carrots in, and they had bins to put potatoes in, because, as Jean said, they showed up about 3 times a day on the tables. They were good to fill bellies as well, and for the apples and so forth. And we were told the story that every week, one of the jobs for the young guy in the family was to go down in the cellar and sort out all the starting to over-ripen, not rotten, but over-ripen apples. And he said that way you could eat half-rotten apples all winter long. Handy for it, for sure. Cooking, everything was made at home. Fortunately, by this time, there was cake yeast, and there was baking soda and baking powder, which helped. Before that, what did they have? They had to do their starters and keep the starters going for that leavening. And the Indians did it without leavening at all, and did it on hot rocks, and were apparent in some of the neighborhoods, even when Keith was a little tiny one, that there would be encampments that would draw some attention from people. The Parker family universally loves bread. And so bread was always a hot item to have. And in later years, if you were in a pinch, you could get bread at a grocery or a mercantile. It wasn't a grocery store then, but you could get it. And after, I think, 1924, when a man from Davenport, Iowa, invented the bread slicer, you could get it sliced. But it didn't take long for the bread slicer to go away from Batavia, because it had to be donated to the war effort. So then it was just a solid loaf if you got it there, which we thought was pretty interesting to have. Anyway, Keith loved, and from his family, especially in the warm months, for supper, bread and milk, and maybe some strawberries with it. That was an item that just filled the bill. It was exactly what he enjoyed, and I think they did that a fair amount in their homes. So that was also a good thing. and pie. Oh my goodness. Are we the pie center of the world? And we have one of the pie bakers next to one of the other best pie bakers I can think of right here in the front row with Kathy Burris and Ashley Manning. Anyway, pies were made and kept in a pie safe, and a lot of you here know what that is, but those of you who don't, it was a wooden cupboard with pierced tin sides, but screen wire underneath, so no little four-legged creatures could help themselves to the contents of the pie safe. So we are blessed to have the Parker pie safe in our home. Really, it doesn't have any pie in it, however. and noodles, oh good grief. They made noodles in huge batches. They had the eggs for the egg yolks, and then you had the flour, and they hung them over everything. They hung them over chairs. They laid them on newspapers on the floor. They made giant batches, and they were so thin, so thin. Jean's mom always talked about that cutting them so fine. I mean, like fine, like spaghetti fine, it was an art. It would, if I made a slab of noodles and threw it in a kettle, that would be cutting them pretty good for me. So anyway, I just can imagine how that was for them to meticulously cut them into those beautiful noodles to serve for the family. And ice cream, oh my goodness. Keith always said, if you plan to eat the ice cream, you'll be on the crank at some point. You have to do your part, and I know at least one of ours remembers that well. Anyway, it was a good thing. There were not a lot of children in Jean's generation, so we had the honor of helping to clean out a number of estates over time, and we learned some important things. Our elders never threw anything away, and I'm doing my best to emulate that in my life, because I want these people to say, why?
You
Why?
might need it. It's 20 years later, but you might need it.
We laugh about his buckets of bolts that were inherited from his father and probably the other father, and when you need a bolt, you can't find it, so you
I know
go
it's there, but I can't find it.
So I go to town and buy another bolt. That way everything is fine. Anyway, and the other thing we learned quite scarily was beware of ancient canned goods. So when we were cleaning out the Parker house, it was with egg baskets that we went to the cellar and gently loaded old canned goods, carried them up as if they were Molotov cocktails, and put them in the back of the pickup truck. And when Jean drove down the road, they were Molotov cocktails, because it sounded like an insurgence happening in the boom, 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 as they're exploding in the back of the truck. Saying, thank goodness we're out of the house with them before this has happened, and he's on his own on the cleanup, right? When it comes to that. And laundry, I can't imagine, can you? I mean, it was done by hand for the most part. You had to haul the water, heat the water. You had the board, and we have one of them, one that has not had a lot of use. Some of them were really worn thin. And then we also have a Hibbert hand clothes washing instrument. I call it that. It looks like a plunger, and it's metal. It's in the case upstairs. But if you can see inside, it has convoluted metal parts in it so that when you plunge the water, it made agitation. The water would come up fountain through it, and that must have seemed like a wonderful addition to laundry day to be able to use. Laundry was done in order, wasn't it? What came first? The whites. Had to do the whites first, and then the mediums, and then the work clothes, because you weren't changing water every time, were you?
Always on Monday.
And always on Monday. Oh my gosh. Well, you made you look forward to Monday, didn't it? For sure. And they were hung outside in all kinds of weather, freeze dried. And the mantra was, well, they smell so good. So do these fingers, huh? And inside too. I mean, things were hung inside, and then came the dreaded ironing. And we have some of the sad irons, which were appropriately named because you heated them on the stove, and you had to be sad the whole time that you're doing that ironing. And then education. How about your dad?
He attended Des Moines #2 school, which
will know.
was in Section 4 in Des Moines Township, all the way through 8th grade. And then went to work on the farm, I believe, which was kind of the way you did it in those days. But grew up to be on a bank board and was president of the bank, not an active president, but was on the bank board for 42 years and retired from farming and was a country school. They were okay. They did the job really well.
One of the most intelligent men I think I've ever known. And he was not given to exaggeration. And when he said the snow was to the top of the fence post, I knew it was true, that the snow was to the top of the fence post when they walked to school, in all kinds of weather. And, you know, I just think of what this man managed to do, holding everything together and growing. It's just amazing to me that that's how it was. Then there was shopping. Did people get to go shopping much? I don't believe so. Maybe there might be a trip a week, according to the family, if you needed things. But a very interesting thing to me was, for the things that you could not procure in Batavia, you could dispatch a child with a wooden box, a list from mom for, say, spices or things like cinnamon, things like that, and the coins. Now, the child would walk to the Peavine Railroad. Anybody hear of the Peavine? All right. It was a narrow gauge that connected Ottumwa to Fort Madison, and it crossed 4 southeastern Iowa counties. It went through 2 farm gates and turned around in a pasture. And the conductor had to open and close the gates and shoo away any curious cows or anything like that. And I'm trying to think, what year was it? In 1891, they added a Libertyville leg to it, and it was called the L line or the Jerkwater. Now, Marilyn, do you know why it was called the Jerkwater?
No, I don't.
I don't either.
Well, I went right through where I live.
Did it?
My garage sits on the railroad track.
Oh my gosh, right there in Libertyville. Anyway, the child felt they were pretty lucky if they got chosen to do that. And then the conductor would take the box and the list and the coins and take it to Ottumwa. It was taken to the mercantile. The order was filled, delivered back to the train, and it came back, and the trains were on time. Fortunately for the fat hens, the trains were on time, right? That would be really a bad thing to have go over. And the child or whomever was back to pick it up and take it back to the farm, and you were able to get the things that you needed. So to me, that was pretty darn good. All right. Did I do 2?
Yeah, you did.
It was on purpose.
Yeah.
Traveling for families was limited. You didn't get a lot of places. Travel, was dependent on weather for lots of things, as well as the distance for things. So they could go to Batavia, they could go down the road to the Brethren Church. They went to family events. That was a big deal. Family events, getting together, not necessarily just reunions as we think of them today, but get-togethers for the family. And some of the family got to go to the 1904 World's Fair in St. Louis, and we have some souvenirs from that in the case upstairs. But the family get-togethers, when we were talking about it, reminded us not only of the chickens, but everybody had their specialty that they made and that they brought to it. And one aunt always brought succotash because she raised the corn, she raised the limas and so forth. And she always brought it to the family reunion. And she said one day that she had a special addition to it that made it even better. And she divulged that she put castor oil in it. And I suspect that she went home with succotash the next time that she took it to a family get-together. Oh my gosh. The mud roads, they talked about how the mud rolled off of the wheels of the wagons or of the buggies, and that when automobiles came, that you still got the horses out to try to pull the cars out of the mud, when they were trying to get through those country roads. It had to really, really be something. So recreation then, what did that include? Well, baseball for the guys, for sure. They like to play baseball. Women got together and chatted. If you were on the farm with just the children, it probably was kind of nice to be able to talk to another adult someplace. And they made quilts. And I brought this because we have two of these. They drew the pattern on in pencil, and this obviously has never been washed. And followed that, and you see these itty-bitty tiny stitches on here. It's just amazing to me. I remember even joining Jean's family, there was always a quilt frame set up for them, and they were always working on it or doing stuff like this. And this is a small one. There are a lot bigger ones, and they crocheted these things, and you won't find it in my obituary that she did either, probably one of these. I have the greatest respect and admiration. These are art forms, they're pieces of our history, and they are fabulous to have all of these things. The treadle sewing machine, they made most everything they wore, had to be fabulous to have versus doing everything by hand. When things were tight, I know Keith would talk about getting together and going to someone's house, walking usually, to a pasture, laying out a ball field, and they had eggs and cream, but the women would scrape together enough sugar to make that ice cream, and that would be a big outing. Plus then playing cards and games was a big thing. You made your fun. You made it, and for many people, recreation was work. That you got out and worked and did your thing. And then I'll let you have it again.
Okay, my turn. Well, my dad had some sayings that he always lived by, and one of them was always live within your means. Kind of be frugal, I guess, and don't spend much more than maybe what you have. And you had to spend a penny to make a penny. So as long as the debt or loan made sense, it's okay. It worked.
Just call your wife at work. Just call her at work and say, would you buy a farm with me?
Diversified families. My dad, I think was before he was married, I'm guessing, worked in the wheat fields, something you did in those days. A bunch of your buddies took together and went to Minnesota or South Dakota, North Dakota, wherever it was, so to speak, worked off the farm. In 1940, Keith and Russell Bonnet.
Where is she? Carol May
Carol
Bonnet, Wise Carver back here. Her dad.
Bought the Libertyville John Deere store. Along with it was hardware. And then Carol's father, Russell, had DX petroleum products and delivered that throughout the country. And I remember one comment that my dad made on every Monday of the month, or the first Monday of the month, or each Monday, they would take a load of horses to Albia to sell them, which they traded horses for tractors, kind of a transition in that period, right during, or just before the war started in 41. So I also remember my dad mentioning that they hid a tractor at the farm because Deere said you got to sell so many. Well, we sold one, but this one we forgot. We had kind of had it off to the side, so our allotment got to be a little bit bigger then. So Keith is also involved in the John Deere store in Stockport, Iowa, and that was Edward Bonnet, which was Russell's brother. You know, and they sold them out. They sold both stores in 1955, thereabouts.
And Ed's daughter is someone many people would know. Ed Bonnet's daughter.
Oh, yeah, Sandra Klingen was Ed's daughter. I remember going with my dad to Moline to pick up tractors and or parts for that. Rationing, right, there was a hidden tractor, taking horses for trade. One other comment, my dad would also make visits on farmers, and maybe we should start about 11:30, because if I get there by noon, they always had wonderful lunch. And they would say, come on in, let's eat. Okay, we'll go in. It was a good time. The John Deere ledger that I looked at had the phone bill was $4. And across from the store in Libertyville was the telephone office. It was in the second story. Lady by the name of Winnie Hewell was the operator. It's one of those deals where you pulled up the cord and you plugged it in and somebody answered. So one day I called Winnie, I called the central, and I said, I want to talk to Billy. Well, I'll try, but I think I just saw him go by. He's probably not at home. We didn't really need too much of a phone then, even. She kept track of everybody in the neighborhood.
They had party lines, crank telephones, which we still have one in our basement.
And
Yes.
And your number might be three shorts and one long or something. And everybody else online, well, I'll see what's going on.
How about assembly?
I did.
You did? Okay, I missed it. All right.
Another thing about the John Deere business was John Deere Days. And what it was, the company of John Deere produced a movie. It was all about the new products. It was of a farm family. And Grandpa was in it, and it was a promotional thing. But it was also invited everybody in the country, everybody in the county to come in, and there were sandwiches and refreshments, and it was something that they don't do today. Lots of memorabilia, maybe lots of freebies, so to speak, that they gave away: aluminum, metal rulers, and thermometer with the calendars on the bottom of it. One of our favorite tractors was a 420 John Deere and a 530. The 530 had a hand clutch. The other one had a foot clutch. Horsepower was maybe 25 or 30, but if you think about it, a lot of you have a lawnmower that's more horsepower than that today, so it weren't very big. Okay. This is the last sheet, okay. It's my turn. It's my arthritic legs, that'll be nice on them. So where are we today? We're more accurately, where's agriculture today? Well, it's in good shape. It's really efficient. I'll send these around, pass it around. I understand that one farmer produces enough food and fiber for 177 other people throughout the year. And what companies and corporations always talking about efficiency. Farmers are efficient. The first one is a combine, a device that collects soybeans and wheat or oats or rye or rice, separates the grain and it falls down, and this auger takes it up, puts it in a bin. In the back end, the residue comes out the back end and it's threshed, put back on the ground. And if you wanted to pick corn, you have to put another device on it that's maybe 6 rows to 18 rows. Same thing, and put the grain in the top and it goes out, trash goes out the back end, the residue. And that's why they're so efficient now, is because of the machinery that can do this. Maybe one farmer farms 1,000, maybe it's 10,000 acres. Maybe it doesn't quite own it, but he farms that many. I recently read something that Deere has a machine that'll collect 7,300 bushels of corn in an hour. Yeah, I know you're saying, that doesn't make sense, because they got to stop and unload the grain that was in the combine, and then they start again. Well, that wastes time. But the efficiency is the combine never stops, because the tractor comes from that end of the field with the grain buggy and dumps it in there, and it goes back to the field. Now, what you noticed, wasn't anybody in the tractor. So now we have tractors that, like cars, you don't have to drive it. Again, an efficiency thing, because the farmer didn't have to hire somebody to drive it. And they were saying that the driverless tractor is probably safer than the car, because what else is out there in the field? Not much. So they're not going to run over anybody. So probably ought to mention just a little bit about the livestock industry, and one of them is the dairy business. And the latest and greatest thing there, and maybe some of you are robotic milkers. Cow comes into the stanchion, it has this little tag on her front or a chip or something that says she produces this many pounds of milk. Well, the feed comes down and feeds her more than maybe one animal that didn't produce quite as much. It washes off the cow and then attaches the milkers, and pipes run to a central refrigerated container, and then the milk's taken away. So same way with the hogs. There are houses with 1,200, maybe 2,400 head in a house, and maybe the farmer doesn't own the hogs, but they take care of the hogs and have the building, and they get to use all the manure, which is a good thing for them. So we feel we're pretty fortunate. We have our son there, Judson, who is in the concrete business and also is in organic farming where we live, and also has cow-calf herds. And this grandson, Sterling, is the herdsman who takes care of all that. So we feel. So I guess I can say that that's our story, and we're sticking to it.
We do have a few minutes left if anyone has a question for the family.
Easy questions, real easy.
Well, then what we do is we recommend that you go upstairs and take a look at the exhibit, the display you put together of your family mementos, and will you be up there as well to answer any questions?
We can, yes.
Sure.
Okay.
But
So-
we thank Sandy Gillespie. She's the one who, we brought the stuff and she put it together. She's fantastic. She did a great job.
Very good.
Thank you for your time.
And we're very honored that the museum is doing this and that they invited us. We thank them as well. There you
All
go.
right, thank you.
Bye-bye, Jerry.